Some news just coming in. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, China Foreign Minister Wang have met for 30 minutes on the sidelines of the G20. They met in South Africa, discussed things including Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra, direct flights between India and China that is to be resumed, is what we're learning. I'm going to go straight across to Shashank for more details. Shashank, this is a step in the direction of normalization of, or rather moving towards normalization of relationship between India and China before 2020 is concerned, isn't it? At least to go back to status quo.
You're absolutely right. I think the two leaders who are, of course, Wang of the Foreign Minister of China and Foreign Minister Jaishankar of India, two extremely experienced diplomats, have been keeping the dialogue going between India and China over the last couple of years, ever since the Galwan Valley clashes broke out. This meeting, of course, taking place on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting, is really focused on keeping the momentum going behind the ongoing progress that we've seen in the India-China relationship. We've already seen the Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri, go to China, really secure a lot of things in terms of the resumption of the Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra, conversations about the resumption of direct flights, and really, in some senses, the tamping down of tensions and a tentative normalization of the relationship between India and China after years of tension. So this meeting between two foreign ministers shows that the two countries are slowly moving back to something looking like a much more normal bilateral relationship. India used to call it a very abnormal bilateral relationship. It's moving back to something that resembles normalcy, and that's what this meeting between the two leaders is about, both to show that the relationship seems to be getting back on track, but also to push the agenda forward.
Push the agenda forward. I'll talk to you about that in a moment from now. Shashank, on what else is the possible agenda as far as both these nations are involved? Live on your screens are pictures coming in from the meeting, the sidelines of the G20, where both foreign ministers of India and China have met. And this meeting has taken place in South Africa, and this in the midst of the G20 talks. Shashank continues to be with us. Shashank, discussion on Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra as well, resumption of the same. What else are you picking up?
Well, what the two leaders are, of course, going to discuss earlier.
When our ties were going through a difficult phase, we should also recognize that in a polarized global situation, our two countries have worked hard to preserve and protect the G20 as an institution. This in itself testifies to the importance of international cooperation. Since our last meeting in Rio during the G20 summit in November 2024, there have been some notable developments. Our NSA and Foreign Secretary have visited China, and there have been discussions about various aspects of our relationship. These have included management of peace and tranquility in the border areas, as well as other dimensions of our ties. I'm glad today to have a further exchange of views. India and China are members of the G20, SCO, and BRICS. There are also regional and global issues of mutual interest, where an exchange of perspectives will be to our mutual benefit. I look forward to our conversation today.
阁下，非常高兴今天能够在 G20 外长会期间与您会见。虽然双边关系面临一些困难，但是我很高兴今天有机会与您互动。我们认识到，在当前分裂的世界中，我们两国在努力共同来保护、来维护20国集团这个机制，这本身也反映出国际合作的重要性。我们上次在2024年11月 G20 里约峰会期间进行过会见，之后呢，双边关系又有。
All right, on your screens right now, in fact, our pictures coming in from the G20 meeting. The highlight of this, as far as India and China are concerned, are the fact that the foreign ministers of both the nations have met for 30 minutes. We hear on the sidelines of the G20 meeting in South Africa, discussing things that have been lying in cold storage for the time being, the Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra, direct flights between India and China. Going back to Shashank for the very latest on that. Shashank, also take us to the details of what else was discussed. You did mention through your sources that Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra was also discussed.
Absolutely right. So Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra, as the foreign minister pointed out, also, of course, as you mentioned very rightly, the resumption of bilateral ties, but also very interesting, not just, Dr. S. Jaishankar saying very clearly that we're not just talking about the bilateral relationship, but also about the broad sweep of what India and China are doing on the world. He said, of course, very clearly that we're both members of the G20, we're both members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There are a lot of issues on which we work very closely together, and it's useful for us to start talking to each other on those questions. It's a very striking tone shift, which, of course, before the Ministry of External Affairs was making very, very clear that unless the border issue is resolved, a broader normalization in the relationship is not going to be possible. Now you're seeing with this latest remarks coming from the foreign minister that India and China are beginning to look at what they can do in the world together on issues ranging from Central Asia to counterterrorism to climate change to multilateral institutions like the G20. So it is, in some senses, a shift in tone towards, as you were mentioning before, something looking like normalization.
All right, something looking like moving towards normalization of ties in whatever way they can. Jaishankar, I'm going to thank you for the moment for joining in with your inputs on that story that we are tracking very closely as far as the meeting of the External Affairs Minister with China's Foreign Minister is concerned.